Good afternoon, folks. Very warm welcome. So my name's Paul. I'm the founder and CEO of Trickle, and I've got the pleasure of introducing and hosting today's webinar, the third in our Be the Change series. The topic today is the power of one, how individual actions can ignite organisational change. Please excuse my husky voice. I've got my lockets here. If this was yesterday, I wouldn't have been here today. So I've got my colleague Rebecca on standby just in case my cough takes over. Today I'm joined by two absolutely fabulous guests. We've got Laura Skaife-Knight, who's Chief Executive of NHS Orkney, and we've also got award-winning mental health engagement and transformational speaking coach, Nick Eiston. And the format of today is we're going to have a fireside chat around the theme of the power of one. And we're also going to be inviting questions from the audience. So please use the chat tool to send in any questions you have. And we'll have at least 15 minutes before the end of the session to cover these questions. Thanks to those that have already sent in. We've got a few with us today. So let's get going. Laura, can I start by giving you a very warm welcome? And can I just ask you to spend a minute introducing yourself to our audience, please?
Of course you can. Thanks, Paul. And afternoon, everyone. It's really good to be here. So I'm Laura Skaife-Knight, Chief Executive at NHS Orkney, as Paul said. And I've worked in the NHS now, predominantly in England, but now in Scotland for just over 20 years. And really proud of my quite unusual background and route into a Chief Exec. I was previously a Director of Communications and External Relations. So I've got experience in some of the largest acute teaching hospitals in the UK to some of the poorest performing organisations, and I've done a lot of turnaround jobs. So big organisations, small organisations, and now of course we're running an island health board in Scotland, and a couple of achievements I'm really proud of because I think they're really relevant to this afternoon's conversation really. I was part of the management team in the Queen Elizabeth Hospital in Norfolk to turn around the worst performing hospital in England at the time on every indicator, to move that into a good organisation as judged by the Care Quality Commission. And central to that was culture change, staff engagement, and a real focus on organisational change and improvement. And then I guess my philosophy in terms of how I lead, and I think we'll get into some of these themes with Nick and Paul this afternoon, I really look forward to that, is people first, always, in my case, patients and staff, visible and compassionate leadership, authenticity, and just completely being yourself all of the time. And we'll hopefully explore some of these themes this afternoon. Thanks, Paul.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Laura. Nick, very warm welcome. Can I ask you to do the same, please?
Yeah, absolutely. So my name is Nick. I'm an inspirational speaker on the lived experience of mental health. Your first question, it is a proper job, I promise you. It's paid my mortgage for the past 10 years, so it is a proper job. But I'm not solution focused. I'm not a coach, a counsellor, a medical professional, not your guru, and nor do you want that in your life, trust me. I'm far too empathic for that. But for me, the gap is the engagement, and that's the bit that I kind of work on. So I use lived experience of my own mental illness and mental health challenges to help increase engagement in initiatives and solutions and practitioners, essentially. With my other cap on of the millions I own, I'm also a transformational speaking coach, but it's not presentation skills, as you're about to bear witness to. It's about changing your narrative to change your experience. And I deliver this in the prison system, in education, with very kind of hard environments, so victims of domestic abuse, young adults who are very much of a poor start in life. Basically, I get dropped in to work with the people that don't tend to engage with mental health initiatives. And one of the vehicles that I use is public speaking, both coaching and delivering.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Nick. So thanks very much for joining us today, and thanks to everyone who's joined in to tune in. So Laura, can I start by looking at some real life examples around the power of one? Can you share a specific example from your perspective at NHS Orkney where a small action has led to a significant positive change within the organisation?
Yeah, of course. Things, and these are really small things, but actually the small things really matter. And again, that's one of the themes I think I'll keep coming back to, the power of saying thank you. So every week I challenge myself, and it's not difficult because I've worked with some amazing colleagues here. I have every week to say thank you to about 3 to 5 colleagues at various points of the week in different ways, whether it's an email, a little thank you card, buying people some flowers, popping around to say thank you in person. Those small gestures might take a couple of minutes, but it means so much to those colleagues, and it's midst my busy weeks, and whether it's national, regional work that I'm doing, at the heart of what I do here is making sure we put our staff first, because if we don't put our staff first, we will not deliver great patient care. So those small saying thank you, small gestures, hugely important, and that's the things people notice. Then secondly, Paul, just as a perhaps slightly different example, something that makes a difference. When I get something wrong, I hold my hand up to that in quite a public way in the organisation. I say, I've got this badly wrong. This is what I've learnt from it. I'm sorry, and we're not going to repeat this. So just had a staff briefing with about 100 of my staff this morning, and when I get something wrong, I tell all of my staff I've got something badly wrong. Sometimes I'll say it to the local community in Orkney. If I've made a wrong judgment call, I hold my hand up, whether it's a big mistake or a small mistake. And I think big enough to do that is really important as a leader. We should get much more credibility and trust.
Brilliant, thank you. Can I ask you a couple of questions about that, Laura? So, reaction, right? So you come in, new chief exec, you're walking around, you're thanking people, you're giving people flowers. Was it like, whoa, what's going on here? What was that reaction?
Couple of things really, and I'm really honest, and you'll get to know me hopefully in the course of the next 30 minutes or so. People said to see more of me in 8 weeks than they had seen some of my colleagues in 3 or 4 years, and that's when I knew I had a problem, Paul, and that's why I am really clear on visible and compassionate leadership. I think people really liked it. People loved that people had taken the time out. I'd popped down, I was visible, I'd just gone down to say hello, thank you, you've done a good job. People really welcomed that and found it really refreshing.
Brilliant. And do you see people doing the same because you're leading by example? Yeah,
I see a ripple effect of colleagues, and not just exec colleagues, leaders at every level of the organisation doing the same. So I'm going to give you another example. I've reintroduced long service awards in response to staff feedback. Absolutely led from the front on that, and I personally hand out certificates every single week, as many as I can. I've had teams leaders contacting me actually just yesterday saying, Laura, in my speech and language therapy team, we've just had a fabulous lunch, coffee and cake. I've handed out my certificates. We had some homemade certificates. That's what things are about, the ripple effect of, seeing somebody role model something, and then those things you see elsewhere in the organisation. It's just fabulous. And if people will follow example, if they see good practice, see something they like, you'll see it across the organisation. And again, it's about kindness, small things matter, and actually looking after each other and saying thank you. And I don't think those are difficult things to do.
Yeah, love that. Brilliant. Thank you so much, Laura. So now, small actions, big impact. Can you share an example from your career where a kind of single, seemingly small action by an individual has led to a significant positive outcome?
Yeah, I think it comes down to, can I just say, Laura, I love that, by the way. That's so cool to hear. That kind of pay it forward mentality to hear in an organizational setting is really powerful. Anyway, yeah, I think for me, it's recognizing and actually harnessing the power of lived experience and the experience of your colleagues. So as much as it's refreshing and kind of great sometimes to hear an outside voice talking about different experiences, actually it's more powerful to hear one of your own talking about their own experiences, because it builds trust, it builds rapport, and it kind of gives people permission and feel safe enough to reach out and talk about their own experiences. And what you find is that your experiences aren't unique, even though you think they are. When you start to share them, that you find community and you find commonality. And I think for me, one of the biggest outcomes is recognizing that by using that kind of that network skill, that conversation skill, it creates amazing positive change for people. To the extent of one of the clients that I work in, we set up a really informal kind of whole day of me being around and having coffees with people and that kind of stuff, tapping into people's experiences. And they were talking to me because they knew I had no agenda. I wasn't there to fix them. I wasn't there to be the solution. I was just there as somebody to listen to somebody. And I think that's the thing, essentially in life, people just want to be heard and understood. And a lot of the time in a very noisy world, we don't feel those things. So actually by me kind of putting that format in place, and then they carried that on within the organization, at least 3 people that we know of, 3 young men actually who were, as it turns out afterwards, suicidal and having suicidal thoughts, came back and engaged in the employee assistance program, come back and engaged in the NHS practices that were available in the locality. And I think that for me is the perfect example of lived experience. ethically, morally, and for insurance purposes, it's really important to stress that lived experience is not the answer, though, but it is a fantastic tool for engagement. The solution has to be delivered by people that are trained and qualified and professionals in the space.
Yeah, brilliant, Nick, thanks. So you've talked about working in some hard environments. I'm guessing there's moments where you have challenges talking to people about how to speak up, right? And it must be really rewarding when you get to see that almost instant, I guess, in some cases, like that kind of transformation. Maybe not instant, that's maybe not the right word, but when you're in a session with someone, right, and maybe someone that hasn't found their voice or for whatever reason finds that difficult, and you get to see that, and then I guess that's a moment where you're like, look, we're demonstrating here the power of voice, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the Find Your Voice program, especially in the prison system, and parents will get this, by the way, prisons far easier than schools. Trust me. Not only get backup in prisons, they get armed backup in prisons. Don't get that in schools. But for me, the biggest realization when I started to work in the prison service, especially, and also with ex-Marines, ex-military, that I also do some apprenticeship training as well. The biggest experiences are that when people start to tell their story, you realize it's surprisingly close to everybody else's story. They've just took a one twist and a one turn in a very different direction than somebody else, and it's taken them down a whole different route. One of the biggest realizations for me of walking into my first prison, which was HMP 5 Wells, I'll always remember that day, because my only experiences of prison systems were watching The Green Mile and The Shawshank Redemption. Looked very different to that. If you took away the security and the checks and measures and everything else, it felt just like a university. The residents, as they were called them, that even though they were engaging in the training and the college training, they were just the same demographic as every other student I work with in universities and colleges. So for me, it's recognizing that being able to take ownership of your story as opposed to being defined by your story, and for me personally, it's been one of the biggest therapeutic moves that I've ever made, and one of the biggest therapeutic moves that I can deliver and give to other people. Is taking ownership of your experiences.
I love that, and that kind of sense of responsibility as well, which touches on Laura's point earlier about, standing up and saying, hey, look, I didn't get this quite right, One of the things that we all have in common is change, right? We help introduce change. That's what we like to do as an organisation. We help organisations deliver improvement. Laura, you've obviously done a lot of massive positive results in your turnaround work. Congratulations on that. So when it comes to driving change in the workplace, what do you believe are the key ingredients for successfully driving change within an organisation, regardless of the position you might have in that organisation? I'll ask that to you both, and whoever wants to shout first, feel free.
Okay, so a couple of things really. I think staff ideas. Staff know their areas of work better than anybody else, me, board members and others. So it's about empowering staff, and I've had a number of staff idea schemes. Here it's called Bright Ideas. It's got real traction in the organisation. We socialise those ideas every day of the week. Small ideas, but ideas that have an impact on patient and staff experience for the better. Previously, in a former organisation, we had a scheme called Just Do It, but again, similar concepts about small ideas and staff feeling supported to implement those ideas, and then talking about change across the organisation. But also, I think asking the question of staff, if your service didn't exist, how would you create it? And in not one instance in my 20-year career to date has somebody said what I've got today, because this is about continuous improvement. Whether you're a struggling organisation or an outstanding organisation, you still can continuously improve and chip away to do a better job for patients and the community. So I think small ideas and keep socialising them. I've got a really clear view when it comes to communicating about change in an organisation. There's only two things I ever talk about, and I do not manoeuvre away from that. Firstly, our strategic objectives, and secondly, our values. If it's not about those things, I do not talk about them in my internal comms or external comms, because you've got to have a golden thread in the organisation. And with that, and I perhaps should have started here in my answer, it's our job as leaders to inspire, to give hope, and to inject belief in an organisation that something can be done, even when people think something might be impossible. Nothing's impossible. And I think that's my job every day, to say we can do this. you know, if we work together, and look, I've said this morning in my staff briefing, we're starting to get results, so it can be done. So let's apply ourselves. So it's having a compelling vision to start with, and then people will start to follow you. And then I think another couple of reflections on this topic are celebrate and recognise wins. So instead of saying this is all so difficult, we're underperforming in this area, this area, and this area, which is what the NHS is all, it can be all about sometimes. Actually, as I said this morning again, it's not all bad. There are green shoots. Let's celebrate the small wins and recognise we're making progress, and actually really pause to reflect on the good things, and then go on to the, but actually we've got to do better, and we can do better in these areas. And then I think finally for me, you will in any organisation have people that are well and truly on the bus, as I call it. And then people who you could do anything you wanted. I could be here another 20 years, and those some people are just never ever going to get out on the bus. It's the people in the middle of that where could shift either way. Those are the people in the organisation you've got to really focus on to nudge them into the getting on the bus. Or if they're not willing to get on the bus, there comes a point you've got to ask them to get off the bus. So that's how I manoeuvre myself around my own organisation. And finally, there are people in every organisation who I call a barometers or a temperature gauge. Probably 5 to 20 people in my organisation. If I want to go out and I'll say, so what do you think? What do you think to this? How does it feel? You have to know who those people are in your organisation to go to really understand how does it feel on the ground, to keep yourself in check, in touch with reality, and how people are responding to change. And I'll just give you a final comment, Paul. I've just spent an hour this morning with our senior charge nurses who've, you know, mini chief operating officers really in everyone else's world. They've got a really difficult job. They've told me this morning that they are really struggling, that they think we're doing too much change, that we're starting to put the roof on the house before we've even put the foundation. So I've said, okay, I get that. You tell me what you'd like me to stop. And we've had an honest conversation about that. That was a sense check to me. And they were my barometers this morning, that I'm driving my own bus too fast, and I've got to put the brakes on a bit to give my own staff a chance to breathe. So all of those things, I think, combined is, I guess, my philosophy of how I lead through change and improvement.
Brilliant, Laura. There's a load of magic in there. I have to ask you with the bus analogy, does that mean you're a Jim Collins fan? Was it Jim Collins from Good to Great? Do you know the book?
Yeah, I do. Yeah. I did that actually. Yeah, nice stuff.
It's a good book. Yeah. It made me think of reading that book about 20 years ago. I love that. Recognising wins, that's something that's frustrated me pretty much my whole career. And one of the kind of core reasons for creating Trickle really was, I guess, as humans, right, we focus more on the negative than we do the positive. And especially when times are tough, you know, and we're all working hard on targets that, and sometimes, and I guess in your environment, especially, Laura, it'll be a lot of the time, you know, it's publicly, targets aren't maybe being met, you're behind the ball, you know, all those types of things. And it's so important to do that, right? It's, you know, keeping morale up and celebrating wins is essential. Nick, can I ask you that question about ingredients for success in terms of driving change?
I think it's great to have these different approaches, as I'm not a leader or solution focused in the change or leadership sense. From an individual perspective, and talking about the power of one, very often it's changing our relationship with change. Most of the conversations I have are trying to encourage the individual to change their own relationship with change. It's along the lines of, if I said to you tomorrow, there's going to be a big change in your organization, everybody generally would think, it's going to be bad, it's going to affect me, and it's going to affect only me and nobody else. It's going to find me, punch me in the face, and run away as fast as you can. And I think therein lies the problem. Maybe it's because I'm an old guy looking back, I don't know. But it's only been through the periods of change that the most exciting things have happened. It's only been through the biggest adversities the most exciting opportunities have been created, but you never see it at the time. And I think a lot of the time, the work that I do in the space that I work in, and again, especially in situations where people may have lost hope or hope for something better, which drives all of us, is making them realize actually, firstly, wherever you are now, even if it's a bad situation, asking yourself the question, what does this make possible? And actually seeing the opportunities in every challenge, whether it's a workplace shift or a personal shift, is actually starting to realize that this could be forging you for something better to come. It's a leap of faith sometimes, but again, it's changing our relationship with change, because automatically we feel that it's going to be a negative impact. And certainly from an organizational point of view, as Laura mentioned and also seems to amplify and encourage herself, is no longer can we lead through instruction. Because I know back in my early 20s, going for my corporate training, I was told that if you to instruct and to lead people is you tell people what to do, and if they don't do it, you do it louder. It doesn't work, by the way. It never did. Now more than ever, it's about, as Laura showcased, it's emotional leadership. It's leading through influence over instruction, the ability to be vulnerable, and the ability to be authentic within the remit of our roles, of course. And I think for me, that is such a huge link with change on an individual setting. And one of the biggest commonalities between the mental health space, through gender, sexuality, identity, race, all of these things that come into play, it's the one word, and that's belonging. That actually, that we don't feel we deserve to be any better or any greater than where we are right now. So we don't, and we don't see the aspiration, we don't see the hope, we don't see the change to be a positive thing. And I think especially to the backdrop of the past 4 years, we've kind of been forced back a little bit into survival mode, where we're just waiting for the next bad thing to come and hit us around the corner. So therefore, goal setting, the traditional kind of self-development stuff, goal setting, aspiration and hope, they've all kind of taken a back seat. And I think a lot of people need that right now. So if we're going through a period of change, again, having that individual conversation, but also trying to implement an inspirational or motivational edge to that, what could it make possible?
Brilliant. You said something there, which I've written down, leading with influence over instruction. That's magic. Like that's a beautiful soundbite. You could write a book called that, Nick. I'd buy that book. Can we talk about barriers?
Write a blog. Thank you. I'll take the compliment. Thank you.
Can we talk about barriers? So, Laura, you just talked about the magic that you need to see to kind of drive change, right? And that was a brilliant list of things that are really important to you. What about barriers, right? I'm sure you've come across those, maybe not just in this job, but in the background that you've talked about. What would you say are the most common barriers to creating a culture of open communication and psychological safety? And importantly, how do you think you can overcome those?
Yeah, I think a few things. The organisation I'm working in at the moment is a hugely fragile and challenged organisation because it's had a difficult couple of years and a lot of churn and change, as I call it, especially at the top of the organisation. And what I'm trying to do is bring stability to the organisation, and so we can create sustainable change. But I think in order to move an organisation forward, actually you've got to understand its past a little bit and not dwell on the past, but you do have to demonstrate what's gone before and understand why staff are a bit bruised or fragile, or what is the baggage that people are carrying, and help colleagues to move on somehow. And in some cases, real fear where perhaps something's happened or somebody's done something or led something in the past, and actually they've suffered perhaps detriment as a result, or they've had a really negative experience. So really don't trust whoever's in leading the organisation, whoever that is, and that happens to be me at the moment. Actually, some people feel unable to move on because they've had such an awful experience, whether it was sometimes 1 year ago, but sometimes people talk to me about things and say, I think it happened a couple of months ago and it happened 10 years ago, and that person still has not got over that. So again, I think it's about building trust, understanding the past, but allowing people to move on. But you build trust by following through on results. Me not just talking about things, because we all talk about things, following through, and myself doing what I say I'm going to do. Or as I call it here, closing the loop. Things not just going into the ether when people have got ideas or concerns, actually addressing those, listening and following through and doing something about it. And I talk a lot about that in my own organisation every week, because all of those things inspire confidence. And when I came into this organisation, I took perhaps quite an unusual step as chief exec, and I gave myself a portfolio, like an executive director portfolio, because at a time I was asking my exec team to deliver, I gave myself a portfolio so my own team could see I was being held to account, that I had to deliver, I had to get results, I was held to account at board. So again, I was role modelling, I'm going to deliver and I'm asking you to deliver, and I'm in this with you together. And others, perhaps some of the chief execs, I'm not saying I'll do that forever, but again, for the first 2 or 3 years, I've committed to driving change myself, not just symbolically as the leader of the organisation and the chief exec, but actually by having a portfolio showing I'm capable of doing this as well, and really leading from the front. And I think a combination of those things, Paul, has put us in good stead here, because it feels different. The culture feels different within a year already. And I know people that people are starting to see change, feel change, but at the heart of that is consistency of behaviour. Even when I'm having my worst possible day, I am alive to the fact that everybody, from the moment I leave my house in the morning, especially living on a small island of 22,000 people, to the moment I step foot back in my house at night, I am under the microscope and in a tiny goldfish bowl. People know if I'm not okay. People pick up on it, and you have to be ultra alive to that in a really small system.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing that, Laura. I really appreciate that. So trust is something that I think is really, really important. You know, we talk a lot at Trickle about psychological safety with our customers, with our prospects. One of the things that we have on our platform that helps encourage people to speak up is optional anonymity. And one of the phenomena we see across our customer base is really interesting. So the average level of anonymity in our platform is 39%, right, across our customers. What happens is that when people start seeing that they're contributing suggestions, speaking up about the things that are important to them, and then there's progression, momentum, little changes, sometimes outcomes, trust increases significantly. And what happens is that anonymity drops. It's really interesting, right? So you start at a level of anonymity, change happens, trust increases, anonymity drops. People find their voice. It's really cool. I love being able to see that. Nick, I'm going to come back to you again. So I've joined an organisation, right? And it's a big organisation, and I think that there's things that need to be changed, and I don't know how to do it. I'm thinking, anything I can do is going to be too small to make a difference. If you're my coach, what are you going to say to me?
I think for me, it's recognising. I think it's recognising a couple of things. I think the first thing is recognising that you don't have to be right at the top to create positive change. Actually, to use a small example to make a point, it helps, by the way, trust me, it helps. But I did an internal podcast for a client where we had their CEO talking about his own mental illness, mental health challenges. And then when I was working, and I thought that's amazing, so open, so transparent. When I was working in that business a month later, somebody came up to me and said, well, it's easy for him to say that because he's got no fear of judgment or dismissal, and I kind of get that. And I think for me, true culture change, the stickability of it, for want of a better word, is driven through the middle. And I think it's empowered and enabled by the senior structure, but it's driven by the people in the middle, the team managers, the line managers, and those kind of roles. For me, I think they're kind of the glue that holds all this together. So if you're thinking that your voice isn't important, I think it's a case of understanding, why aren't you speaking up? And in a workplace environment, the three reasons I think people don't reach out for help, this also applies to mental health help as well, is anonymity. People, as you already mentioned, people are terrified of being judged, dismissed, or ridiculed for having an opinion, for sharing an adversity. The second one is by kind of speaking up or by reaching out for help, is it going to cost them something in that sense as well? Whether that be time, or whether they're approaching an employee assistance program, for example, is that going to cost them money? And especially right now, that's a real challenge for people. But one of the biggest challenges, and not exclusively, but especially with men, I've found, the reason why we don't speak up about stuff generally is because of our own conditioning. It's generational conditioning of, I firmly remember being told by my dad, don't trust work with your personal stuff. That's kind of like a hand-me-down instruction. So therefore, when I needed help, when I was going through my challenges, I didn't reach out for help. Now, that wasn't done for any cruelty or lack of love or any ill will or intent, but it has an impact because actually that was my conditioning. So I always feel that we have all the answers we'll ever need. It's just about asking ourselves better questions. So if you're afraid about having a voice, ask yourself why, and actually really get out of your own way. I think you'd be the first to stand in your own way when you start to question your conditioning and how you're made up and everything else. But it's such an important conversation to have.
Yeah, brilliant, Nick. Thank you so much. I want to talk about engagement, and we're going to go and get some questions. Laura, you've had a comms background as well, which actually I didn't know until today. So thank you for sharing that. Engagement is something that when we speak to customers, prospects, everyone's trying to engage their people, right? For us, engagement needs to have a purpose, right? Why you want to engage. For us, it's about improvement, right? That's the reason we believe it's important. What about in times where you're driving change that might be challenging for your team, for your department, for your organisation? how do you maintain engagement in that environment?
A couple of things really. I'm all about keeping it simple as possible. I think certainly in the NHS we're really good at overcomplicating things, so I strip it back and say let's just keep it really simple. I think firstly, involve staff from day one, listen to staff, get staff input and feedback, and in my case, listen to patient feedback as well, and that should drive every single change we do. Patient and staff feedback is as simple as that, and that listening cycle and loop needs to be constant, not as a one-off staff survey, annual survey, has to be throughout the year. So I think that's the first point. The listening exercise has to be a constant one. I think secondly, I think people need to understand why change is needed in the first place. We're not just doing change for the sake of it. It's got to be a purpose. Either something's not working, we're trying to get to a better place, we're trying to move out of special measures, or whatever the equivalent is. There's got to be an end destination that people understand, whether it's in your service or an organisational change you're trying to achieve. And I think from there, staff knowing what their role is in that, and knowing that they can put forward ideas and actually be in control of their own destiny a little bit. So I'm going to give you an example. We're looking at all of our corporate services at the moment, and we've gone through a lot of exercises with staff asking what works well in colleague services, what needs to be better, and then we've asked the organisation as well, what would they like from these corporate services? And then those teams are now driving their own improvement plan, and they are loving it, because they are owning their own improvements by listening to their own feedback from within their team, but out with the team and what the organisation needs, and they're driving their own improvements. So actually, yes, we've set it up, but that team are now in the driving seat themselves and are really owning that. And actually, that sense of ownership and empowerment, they actually have a sense of empowerment they've never had before, because it's not being done to. They're flying with their own improvement programme, and I'm giving them permission to really drive it themselves and let us know when they need support and help, rather than being a top-down. It's not a top-down. Those days are gone in terms of how you run organisations and manage services. It's a totally different NHS now.
That's quite a culture change, I guess, for what people have been used to, right? So it's difficult to embed, but the results are quite visible, right? People feel it.
It is difficult, and it takes people need to take a first step. And again, I always say, look, fly with it. Seek forgiveness, not permission. I'm empowering you to lead change. And if you make mistakes or if it doesn't work, so be it. We move on, we learn from it. If it doesn't work, we stop that and start something different. It's about giving people permission to fly, because there's so many stars in the NHS. And, my job isn't about me. My job is to make people amazing at what they do. And that's why the way I think about it every day. I see amazing and potential untapped talent around me every day. And my job is to say, so what is it you want to do next? What do you want to get involved in? Have you thought about going on that secondment? What's your next step? It's not about me. Far from it. My job's about everybody else in this organisation and making them the best they can be.
Love it. Brilliant, Laura. Thank you. Right, I've got one more question I'm going to ask you both. I'm going to start with you, Nick. Let's think about the future. The future, what do you envisage the future of the workplace culture being? What would you like to see, especially related to employee well-being and voice?
I think unless your workplace is solution focused, and what I mean is, obviously the NHS is the prime example of that, where it is solution focused. If it's a business which isn't a medical professional or a trained therapy kind of practice, is recognizing that you don't have to be the solution, and not everything you have to do has to be the fix. And I think a lot of the responsibility, and also the people that keep at arm's length, is because they don't want to take on that responsibility. They won't say that, but that's kind of what they feel. They overthink it's a little bit too much, and we're going to stay arm's length from that, or we try and fix everybody that comes our way. I think it's recognizing that by taking a four-dimensional approach to it, so incorporating things like lived experience, by incorporating awareness, which doesn't necessarily need to have a solution at the outcome, but making sure that you have that bedrock of solution-focused tools, having things like employee assistance program, at the very least, very active signposting programs, and actually recognize that most mental health champions, mental health first aiders, any champion of people are in that position because they've had negative experiences themselves, by and large. Even people like us very, very often we get into that role of people leading because we have had negative experiences before, directly or indirectly. By nature, though, we will then have a tendency to take on the the burdens, respectfully, of other people. So if you've got a team of 10 people, you've got 11 people burdens on your shoulders before you go home. And we always know home is not always a quiet place for a lot of people. So it's actually recognizing that to create a culture where trust and rapport and human-to-human conversations are the thread that runs through everything. And for me, I think that then takes away the responsibility that people often shy away from taking any action at all. I hope that makes sense. In my head, it makes sense, but I do have a tendency to ramble.
And the thing that really stands out for me, Nick, is human to human, right? That's you know, if we go back 20 years in the workplace, and you mentioned earlier about tell somebody how to do something and then say it louder, right? And you know, that kind of command and control world, if you like, that hierarchical world, it's nice to see that starting to be broken down a bit and people be more human at work, right? It's so different now compared to what it was even 5 years ago, you know, before the pandemic. And I think that's a real positive.
And for me, what Laura said was absolutely true. Untapped potential is the saddest thing I'll ever see. I see this a lot with the Find Your Voice program, that I will say to people, I wish you saw what I see in you, but they don't. There's something in them, or something that's happened to them before, or maybe a self-esteem issue that's telling them they're not good enough. So therefore, it kind of keeps people down. I think our roles in our different respective ways are actually to empower people to kind of really find their voice, to stand up, to be heard, and to create a platform where people genuinely feel visible in a very visible world.
Brilliant. Thank you, Nick. And Laura, anything you want to talk about on the future and what we should see?
Yeah, I think just Nick's hit the nail on the head. I think I couldn't agree with him more. I think it's no coincidence that if you look at high-performing organisations or well-led organisations, they invest in their culture and creating the right culture, healthy culture, some of the features we've talked about, and they invest in staff engagement, staff experience. So investment in health and wellbeing. Nick's given some really good examples in terms of mental health first aiders, employee assistance programmes, real investment in staff experience and engagement. I think also talked about humility. I think it's come from different guises this afternoon. I'm very honest with my stuff. I have not got all the answers. When I don't know, I say I don't know, or I don't understand, or I don't know what you're talking about sometimes. But you know, it's about being human or real, as I call it. And actually, I often say to my staff, I'm a human being. It might be the chief exec, but I'm a person as well. I've got feelings, and trust me, I have bad days as well. And I think just that humility is really important. And I think fundamentally, and I come back to this every day in various ways here, people over policy and targets. It's as simple as that. If you put people first, in my case, patients and staff, the results will follow. And I think the NHS can be so obsessed, and I know probably in more national meetings than anybody else, so obsessed with targets and policy. Quite frankly, we hit the target and miss the point sometimes, and I say that regularly. People first, every day.
Brilliant. Absolutely fantastic. Thank you so much. Right, we've got some questions on the side panel here. Let's go with the first one. So from Hamish, excuse me while I just read these out. What role does community engagement play in your efforts to empower employee voices, and how can organisations better connect with their communities to drive change? Laura, is that one maybe?
Yeah, definitely.
Let's sit with you.
Yeah, I think so. And I think, I'm going to use my experience here. When I first came into post in Orkney, there was a real disconnect, one between the top of this organisation and the shop floor, as I call it, but perhaps most concerningly for me, with our local community as well. And bearing in mind, we're a small island board. So what we've done is lots and lots of work to reconnect in a meaningful way with our staff and our community by doing some quite deliberate things. So the recent example for us is earlier this year, over a 3 or 4 month period, we did some absolutely fabulous engagement, myself and my chair, with our community to develop a new corporate strategy. And we asked our community really simply, what matters to you? We've listened, and we've now got a strategy that is very clear. This is what matters to our community. So I think it needs to be reconnecting with your community, but doing that in a meaningful way. And it'll be different in Orkney than it is any examples of where you all live. Having really clear plans throughout the year to do meaningful engagement. So again, it's a continuous conversation. And then I guess it's probably easier for me with my communications background, but really that's the heart of, I think, all good chief executives. I have a regular heartbeat of communications with my own staff and our own local community. So there's a real open, transparent relationship on both of those things, and that's a real rhythm every week. Those things happen, And actually, again, it's about those trust and relationships come with that. And I'm not saying we've cracked it yet, but after being here a year and a few months, I think we're well and truly moving in the right direction. And people just welcome openness and honesty and transparency.
Yeah. Brilliant. I love it. Authenticity as well, also key. Question here, this one for you, Nick. What is your long-term vision for the impact of empowered voices on mental health in the workplace?
I think the vision is kind of taking shape, but I also think it's kind of trying to be fully inclusive. I use the example of menopause, for example. So what happens with the work that I've done, it was never by intent, everything's by accident, I'm winging it completely. But as I've worked with people, they've asked me then to host different things. And even things around things like menopause, so things that I haven't experienced personally, but try and bring in a 4D perspective on the subject. So bring in a male point of view. So how can I be an ally? How can I support women who are going through the menopause? And I think for me, that's where voices come into play. It's bringing in different opinions and different experiences. I think very often we fall into the trap of living in an echo chamber. We only ever engage with people like us, or when I know full well that the next person I speak to is probably not a middle-aged white guy with a cap on. So I make sure I surround myself with people who have different experiences, different opinions, different insights, sometimes even different solutions, and collectively bring different offerings to the table through the power of voice and through the power. And part of that is the experiences of people as well, which are completely valid, but I think very often overlooked from a workplace point of view. So for me, that would be the long-term future, is actually having a platform where people within organizations can speak up about various challenges, various adversities and life issues, and actually feel supported to do that, and hopefully inspire and motivate their colleagues as well. The reason why we don't do that again is that vulnerability piece, but I think that's certainly that's being created. I still think we've got a way to go, and I still think there's a big point, which is why you don't find me on Twitter and Facebook and social media and stuff, because I think encouraging people to speak is brilliant, but we need to catch them with solutions. We need to catch them with inspiration at least. And I think if the companies and workplaces can provide a network of lived experience kind of talks and sessions of their own people doing their own thing, I think that's a very valuable thing. And I think that's the next step for me. I think we're getting really good at bringing solution focused things into the workplace, but actually bringing in a different perspective as well.
Superb.
To increase the engagement, of course.
Thank you, Nick. One more question, Laura, I'll just ask you very quickly, what strategies would you recommend to individuals and organisations to combat change fatigue and maintain enthusiasm for ongoing initiatives? I guess maybe you're on the bus, and bus being a bit too fast was maybe part of that today, was that right? It's about understanding your people.
But understanding your people and listening and knowing when something doesn't feel quite right. So I guess I've worked here long enough. I've been walking in the morning and I know there's a funny vibe. I call it the vibe in the organisation. I know if the vibe's not right, and then I find out what's, is that something big I need to worry about? Is it one person? Is it a team? And, spend time with those people listening. And my radar's pretty good on that, and that's where I invest my energies. Stop something if it's not working. They're big enough. Don't flog a dead horse. Stop it. And there's no point in investing your energies if it's not working. Don't do too much change at the same time. Change overload in an organisation. People cannot cope with too much change. So be clear, these are the 2 or 3 big change projects in the year, and really communicate that well, and don't deviate from that. And if you're gonna add something to the pile, take something off, so you're not adding more work to people. It's really simple. I think refresh your priorities. I work on a quarterly cycle. I communicate these are the quarterly priorities, and we report quarterly, because actually how we're doing against those, if you chunk things down into quarters, people see it as more achievable, and actually people can buy into that. But you have an annual plan. And then I think finally, you need a combination of small ideas, the stuff idea schemes I've mentioned, and then big organisation-wide transformation schemes. And those 2 things go hand in hand, but start small, and then those small transactional things will move into transformation once the organisation matures and gains confidence.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. Well, we're out of time, right? And as usual, I could have stayed on here for another hour. But what I wanted to say is thank you so much to Laura and to Nick, to you both, for just sharing some great stories, your wonderful wisdom, insights with us today. And I think what I've loved about today is there's so many things that we can take away, right? We can apply this afternoon, tomorrow, and start making change. So thank you so much for that. A massive thank you to all of you for taking the time to join us today. I hope it's been a valuable use of your time. Just before we go, I want to just point to our next webinar in the Be the Change series, which is going to be on the 25th of September, where we've got the wonderful Kathy Harrison, who's going to be joining us to discuss micro transformations, empower your team to drive impactful change from small everyday actions. There's a QR code on your screen, and if you want to join us, you can sign up via that link. Okay, thanks once again, folks. Really enjoyed the conversation, and have a good rest of the day. All the best.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.